Hello, wonderful. This is Sarah K Ramsey, and I'm here with Karen K Randall. And we were joking, right before we hit live, and I was like, "You have a K? It's your middle initial too." So we're already got Krispy Kreme donuts. You know the signs that say KK. Do you have Krispy Kreme donuts in the Northeast?
In the
Or
Northwest, yes.
Northwest?
Yes, we do. And it was big news when it finally got here, because of course it was later than the rest of the country. And there were lines around the block waiting for Krispy Kremes.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, it's like in New York where there's lines for Chick-fil-A because it's
Yes.
such an oddity.
Yes. Yeah, we have that also. It was very late in the Seattle area where I'm from. And it was the police were out directing the traffic to get in there.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So with Krispy Kreme donuts, my mother's a huge fan. And I think it's always a joke. So in our family, we get Krispy Kreme donuts for birthdays and all that kind of stuff. And one time my son was, I think, 3 or 4. And there was a box of Krispy Kreme donuts, and his little sister she was like 2. So definitely I was super supervised bath time, right? Focused in on her, making sure she came out alive. She's little. And so he was left unsupervised with the Krispy Kreme donuts. And he had 4. And then
Oh no.
What?
That would be did he have the sugar high? Did you notice that he was like,
I noticed he was sick almost immediately, and I noticed that there were 4 donuts missing, and I think he was 3. I think he was 3 because I just, you had a baby in a bathtub. My focus was where it was supposed to be.
Sure.
And yet, it's why moms need eyes in the back of their head, right? I had to keep an eye on the donut box too.
That's funny.
Well, awesome, Karen. So you were a CPA for many years, right?
Yes.
And then you now work with women going through midlife transition, right? So tell people what that means.
Well, I will start with my story. I spent 30 plus years in the business world. By the time I left there, I was a CFO and a financial executive, and I was so tired of accounting and the business world. And so
I've not been in accounting at all, and I'm tired of it.
Yes.
It's like
most people can relate to that.
And I'm like,
yeah. So you can all understand and relate to that feeling, obviously. And so I left the business world and went back to school and got my master's in transpersonal psychology, which many people don't know what that is, but it is a type of psychology that is a philosophy about the way that we are connected and interconnected with one another. And then I, from there, did training as a coach. But this all grew out of what happened in my life when my children left home. And I had this question about who am I? Really, if I'm not a mom, and of course you're always a mother, but if I'm not a mom to children in the home, who am I? And if that's not true, what else isn't true? And so it led me through this journey that I came to understand as a transition journey of letting go, both grieving the loss of that time in my life, and honoring it because it is worthy of honoring anything that you have been impacted by significantly. And then going through the process of imagining and creating the life that I would like to live, and then making it happen. And so that is the transition journey that I lead my clients on. They have this time of an ending. And often when we talk about the ending, we think of an ending as something that's like this, but endings actually can take a lot of time, right? Because there's all of the details. If a relationship ends, there's a lot of details. If your children are leaving home, there's a lot of details. And then you get done with that and you're tired and you're exhausted. And then there's this in-between liminal time where we grieve and we just want to be quiet. And then we start to think about what could happen, and that gets a lot more joyful and a lot more creative as we start to move forward. So it is a process.
And don't you think part of it is learning to give yourself new permissions? Because hardworking mama is so accepted as I talk about personal brands a lot, and a hardworking mama brand, I'm so exhausted, I'm always at the ball field, I'm always at this. A society applauds our exhaustion in that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of the things I think that we discount when we start to look at new ways that we could be in the world, is there are so many gifts that come out of doing it all, right? Of taking care of our kids and our homes, and often working outside of the home and problem solving day in and day out. And if you were to look at an employee who does all of that in a business environment, you'd say a number one employee. Well, guess what? Women are a number one employees and a number one entrepreneurs also.
I love that. So what are some strategies, or some, if someone comes to you and they say, I lost myself, I had the identity of mother, wife, employee, maybe it's someone transitioning into retirement, right? It'd be very similar process, right? Yeah. So what are some strategies to help them get back to them or discover them?
I think the first thing that we really need to do is to look at the box that we've created for ourselves, right? And so we identify it. You think that this is true. Is it really true? And looking at all of those ways that we define ourselves and all of the things that we say we can only do this. This is the way we live. And my job as a coach is to say, is that true?
So let's, some examples. Like, I live alone now, so I don't have a family anymore. Is that kind of one example?
That's an example. Absolutely. So I would counter that with, how many people do you know that live alone and have families by choice?
Friends of the family you can choose. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, families by choice. So you choose who your family is. And actually, how many people have families that are still alive and choose to spend time with their families of choice, right? So you actually get to choose who you spend your time with. And so I challenge the story that we tell ourselves to say, is it true? Are you limited by that? And I think that is a really important first step, is to find out how we are limiting ourselves by the stories that we tell.
So what are some other common limiting? I'm thinking I'm a failure because I'm single. I hear that one pretty often. Is that one you hear pretty often too?
I do hear that. And I like to start by saying, what makes you a failure? Because that's the story, right? What is the story? What makes you a failure? I don't have a job that I'm, proud of. My marriage failed. I don't have a good relationship with this person. And then we go into each one of those stories and we say, let's talk about the whole story. What is it that happened in that? And a lot of times I find that it's forgiveness of yourself, right? It's forgiveness because we think, I should have done this and I should have done that and I could have done this and I could have done that and I didn't do it. And so I'm responsible for everything that happened. It isn't that. It isn't the responsibility. It is that it happened, and that we need to just forgive ourselves for the choices that we made when we didn't know, when we didn't have the experience to know. And then to say, if you forgive yourself for that, then what else can you do? If that is really gone, then we can take that next step, because that is not defining you anymore.
And the next step is what's scary, right? I mean, there's a real safety.
Yes.
If you're listening to this on a podcast and the wind is blowing, you're missing the beautiful Florida trees behind me. If you're watching this on video,
Yeah.
For all the states that are covered in snow right now are probably like hating me deeply. But in some ways, it's easier to hold on to the sadness of what was than create something new. There's
Absolutely.
safety in the sadness.
Yes. So I experienced this in my own story again, Sarah, when my kids all left the home. And I had for years been saying, I can't wait because I'm going to do so many things. There's so many things that, when you have kids at home and you're so busy with them, you don't do. And you stop even allowing yourself to think about what you want to do because you don't get to do it. So why set yourself up for disappointment? And so my children were all gone, and I'm like, okay, I can do those things. I don't know what I want to do. And then I had a few things I wanted to do, and I was scared to go and do them by myself because I had always had my kids as an excuse, right? I had somebody to come along with me to try out something new. Or if I didn't want to do something, somebody was sick or somebody had something to do. And so, I had all of these excuses, and I think that's what we do. We have these excuses and these stories that we build up to stay in our little world. And to step out of that, it is scary. It absolutely is. It's a big step. And it's really about putting on your big girl pants and saying, okay, I'm stepping into my inner grown-up and letting go of that younger, scared part of myself, asking them just to, trust me that I know what's going on, and trying something new. I had a client who had gotten divorced, and she went through that same issue, and it was very scary for her to start doing things. And so she found the things that she really loved, like she loved outdoor activities, and she started doing meetup groups, doing those outdoor activities. And that was a safer way for her to travel that journey because she could interact or not, as much as felt comfortable for her.
So what advice would you give? Because I've heard this from women, and they'll say, well, that's easy for some people because they're braver than I am. So maybe that's something you would have said to an older version of yourself, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So what would you tell to that woman, and what would you tell to yourself, 7, 8 years ago, or however long it's been for you?
I think the first question I would ask is, what's the alternative? So the alternative is to stay unhappy, suffering by yourself. And you get to decide, right? You get to weigh which one of those is more uncomfortable. And when that state...
Well, I want to hold up, right? That's a very good point, okay? And that's a conversation when people say, it's scary to get out of my comfort zone. I think it's really important to really remember that you aren't in a comfort zone. You're already in an uncomfortable zone. That's why we're having the conversation.
Exactly.
Right? So I really want to point that out because I believe you and think I agree with you. And I think that's one of the best ways to get unstuck is to remind yourself how painful this place is.
Right. And I have people who say that about, starting coaching. Well, I'm afraid, or counseling or therapy. I'm afraid to go. And it's like, you get to decide, when does the place where you are become so uncomfortable that you're willing to try something new? And you're in control.
The biggest advice I can give to people is I have never heard a woman say, I'm so glad I waited until I was more miserable. I've just never heard anyone say, a really great life strategy, just wait till you're as miserable as possible. I mean, it's kind of like saying, I'm going to wait and gain a full 100 pounds before I watch my diet.
Right. Or I'm going to wait till I'm 90 years old and then I'm going to work on this so I can benefit from it for a year or two. Right?
I'm going to wait until the cancer's at stage 4 before I go to the doctor. Like that is, that is not, if that's a life strategy that you're unconsciously telling yourself,
Yeah.
I want to be very clear and say that is not a good life strategy. And it is what we unconsciously do. It's what I unconsciously do,
And I think that that's a really good point too, Sarah, is that it's often unconscious, right?
Yes.
We're not making that choice consciously. And so I'm glad that you highlighted it here, but also for people who go talk to friends, or if they're trying to make this decision, having someone help to make this conscious is so helpful.
And it's a better question to ask, right? And to me, reframing it back into I don't do a lot of beat up self-talk, especially as a coach, right? I still do a lot of that. But sometimes I do have a little voice and it's like, Sarah, that's a really stupid decision, and I do have that little, and I think it's an angel on my shoulder, not a devil. I really do, because I don't say, Sarah, you're stupid.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I say, no, if, you have a gaping wound on your arm, let's wait. And sometimes it's funny to like flip it and kind of like talk to yourself in the opposite way and say, oh, you have a huge wound on your arm. If I were you, I would completely ignore that, and maybe it'll get infected. And if it's so bad that you're worried your arm's going to fall off, maybe it'll be painful enough for you to go to the doctor. And even reframing it to say like that unconscious thing kind of really out loud. And once you say it out loud, it's like, whoa, it's like, I would stay in my house for as long as possible, try to get as lonely, make sure you're crying like at least multiple times a week,
right.
with food and alcohol, maybe, pick up an antidepressant on your way home rather than trying something new. And when you start saying that out loud, it's like, oh yeah, maybe this isn't a comfort zone. And I really actually hate the term comfort zone, because it's got a bias to what you're already doing is working, and it's not working.
Yeah, that it's a good thing, right? Because it's comfort, and we all love comfort, but this is not. It is not. It is bringing you discomfort.
Yeah. And if anybody's listening, list all the ways. You kind of saw me do it there, list all the ways that it is bringing you discomfort. So that's a good way to start, like, all the ways you're uncomfortable, all the ways you're kind of miserable. Like get real about it and look at it. Look at that gaping wound on your arm before it gets infected. There's so many people who say, I wish I had done something earlier. I wish I had tried earlier. I wish I had just hardly have anybody say, I'm really grateful that I wasted that many years of my life. And not that your life is a waste. I want to be very gentle and kind and loving and affectionate and sending you all the rainbow sprinkles as I say this. And we need more people patting us on the butt, not always patting us on the back.
Yes. Yeah.
And
I like that you also had a couple of different ways to have this conversation with yourself, because for some people, talking to themselves is, like, I'm not ever going to do that. And so write it down, write yourself a letter, right? And say, okay, today I decided that I was just going to go through this list that Sarah just shared, because I felt like that was my comfort zone. And when you see it in writing, it also shows up really strongly, like, yeah, this just doesn't make sense when I look at it in words.
Well, and getting really scared, we kind of get scared about the idea of change, which again, I hate, because I feel like it's like a bias in our health, because we've heard so many times, you're supposed to be scared of change. And that self-talk, it's like, I am really scared of things staying the same. I am really, really scared of my life looking like this in a year or 2 or 3.
Right. And we talk about stress in that same way, right? Like stress is always a bad thing, but actually some stress is good, and having a little bit of stress when we're doing something new is good, because it wakes us up, it gets the adrenaline going physiologically. We are more alive to take in and deal with new circumstances. So it increases our aliveness.
Agreed. And it certainly makes us more interesting, you know, especially if you're going into the dating world, you're going into a new career, you're going into creating new friendships after children have left, whatever it may be.
Yeah, or the retirement, as you talked about, which is a big thing for people, a new way of being in the world and a new way of defining yourself. Yeah, it's a new way of creating liveliness. As you said, we're more interesting if we have that level of energy and excitement as we're going into something.
I went to dinner with this guy one time. We were with some friends and he was just there. And the only thing he wanted to talk about was movies, which is fine. I mean, you're a movie buff, but it was really like, he was a lawyer, I think. It's not as if he didn't have anything else to bring to the world or conversation. He was an intelligent person, but he just kept wanting to talk about movies. And it's like, do you have any hobbies other than watching a screen? Like, really? It was not an interesting, it would have been interesting for 10 minutes. It was not interesting for 2 hours. And I thought, man, if you had been like a day, he was there with his wife, but I was like, if we had been on a date or something and all you had to talk about was TV, that's concerning, you know. And I also reckon
we all ended up in COVID and quarantine. But we want to change that.
This is during the time of COVID, and I have watched way more TV than I normally would have, and I have complete grace for that. One thing you mentioned is the word, you know, a new identity. Right? Yeah. A new identity within that. So how do you learn to cultivate a new identity after a major life change?
In the type of psychology that I practice, we call it your ideal model, right?
Okay.
And this is the way that, say you're, and again, old world, you go to a cocktail party and you introduce yourself and you say, you know, I'm the mother of three kids, and I work doing this, and these are my hobbies. These are the ways that we identify ourselves both inside and then when we're sharing it with someone else. And so this process of transition is actually redefining what our ideal model is, right? Because we are letting go of parts of it. When somebody retires, they aren't introducing themselves anymore by what they do. Mm-hmm. So it is this process of letting go, that is that grieving and loss of the old parts, and then going through the creative process of, what could I do? What would I like to be? And it can be fun, right? It's like once we start to take the walls off, once we start to say, okay, I'm not that, and but I could do this. Or
so yeah, what are some examples? Like, I'm a avid biker.
I've always thought that looks interesting. Maybe I'll go and try going on a bike ride for the weekend. Or I've always wanted to be a cross-country skier. Or I've wanted to go back to school and get my master's. Or I wanted to volunteer. And what kind of organizations really appeal to my heart. And what I've wanted to spend more time in my spiritual life. What are the practices that I could bring into my daily life now that I have more time? It's like a cascade of imagination and creativity. Once you open that door just a little bit and you realize that you get to decide, you get to create and experiment, it becomes very exciting to create this new way of being in the world that actually fills you up and is a call of your heart.
I really like the idea of the cocktail party too, because it's almost like an elevator pitch, like an elevator sales pitch,
yes.
But for you.
Right.
So may I ask you your elevator pitch? Like if I met you at a party and I didn't get your bio from your PR person before this thing, you know, who would you say you were?
My name is Karen Randall, and I am a coach, and I help women who are going through the aftermath of a significant life event. And that can have big impact in their life, and I help them to travel that journey. I also teach at Sophia University, and I help people to create their life after being in school. So I'm a lot about creativity and making a life that is fulfilling and joyful. And you can
Well,
contact
oh,
me at
yeah, no, that's great. Okay, now I'm going to be really tricky, and I'm going to pretend you're retired.
Yes.
So they can hear the examples of what this sounds like.
Good.
And I'll try to think too about how I would describe myself not connected to work, because obviously, it's cool to talk about the podcast and the book and all, my little elevator pitch. But yeah, can you give me an example as if you were a retired person, how you'd help a client?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my name is Karen Randall, and I retired 5 years ago. And I have found some exciting ways to spend my time. I love to play pickleball and go hiking. And I also volunteer and I help kids learning how to read. And I also work at a women's shelter because I feel like women and children are the future of our society. And I have a lot of time to spend with my grandkids and my kids.
I love it. I love it. And she did a really good job example of talking about, she threw in her kids and stuff at the end, but one was a lot more like relationship based and one was, more outcome based, with your coaching and stuff, to point that out if somebody's trying to do it. Okay. So I'm going to try to do mine. So,
Oh, this is good.
I know you got me thinking. It's really important to hear what that sounds like for people, for listeners, right? Because it's like, what would that be for me? What would that mean for me? So, everybody knows what I do for work. So I want to talk to our listeners about that. So I'll try to personal. So I'm Sarah K Ramsey. I am a thought leader and a world changer. And I'm always looking to create a different and better version of myself and find the hidden nuggets of gold in others, to try to pull out the diamonds that are within them that they may or may not see. I love to read. I love to research. I'm a book nerd and a podcast nerd. And I love to, when there's a problem, to not talk about the problem, but be a part of the solution. And that's something I'm very passionate about, is trying to, there's people who say somebody should do something about that. And I think I'm the somebody. Do I pass?
I love that. And what I loved is that you engaged us so much in talking about your passions and how that has informed the work that you do in the world. And so it really comes from, filling up this need, this call of self, right? The call of your heart. And then we are drawn into that passion as you're telling the rest of your story.
Well, and because I try to think, if I was going on a first date, if I was meeting someone new for the first time and I couldn't talk about what I did. I mean, I talked a tiny bit about what I did, but I could have said I'm a toxic relationship specialist, a best-selling author. I didn't say that. I said who I was.
Yes.
Right? Because I want to be solution oriented and be a thought leader in the world, regardless of what platform it is. Right. Obviously I'm very passionate in the platforms that but I am who I am, even if I'm not a toxic relationship specialist or a mother or a daughter or a wife, right? All those things are just who I am, regardless of what else I'm doing, right? Isn't that the point?
Absolutely. So in my teaching, where I'm helping people to define their career, when we're doing mission statements and philosophy statements, it is about what we call the work beneath the work, or your values.
Yes.
Which is what you're going to bring to anything that you do, whether it is at going to the grocery store, you're still going to live these values. You're going to be a problem solver if you see something happening at the grocery store, right, that needs to be solved. So it is those things that are so much a part of you and so important to you that you're going to bring that into any arena, any part of your life that you are in.
And those are the things that never leave us.
Right.
Our kids are supposed to leave us.
Yeah.
You know, I have a statement, and it's hard sometimes. I'm here this week by myself. I'm not with my kids. I'm not with my husband, and I am we're getting a little bit vulnerable here. I have a belief that birth to death, I am the one person I'm stuck with for life. Okay, I believe that. And I am a 10 out of 10, 100 out of 100 extrovert. And it's been lonely a couple times. It just is. I don't have my structures that I usually have, and I'm recording, I'm meeting clients. It's beautiful. There's so many good things. And I've been lonely sometimes, right? Because I'm not in my identity roles.
Yes.
Some of my identity roles are gone this week.
Right.
I
mean, and it's so important to have that time, right? So you're aware that you're going to be there a lot more in the future, and you're practicing.
Yes. Well, and in many divorce situations, many people are there throughout, earlier than one would hope sometimes.
Yeah.
Even if it's a weekend or a night, but sometimes it's Christmas morning.
Right. And that, I think, is one of the hardest things when you have children. And, it's not only your partner that is no longer there, but then your children are also going back and forth. And so these multiple roles that you define yourself by are leaving, and you're being called to redefine yourself in a number of ways at the same time.
But I love the idea of the mission statement. I kind of talk about it as your brand, but when you think about it as a mission statement and the work underneath the work, I believe you said,
yes,
I love the solidarity of that, right? Like, life changes. Like, one phone call could change every identity piece, that I have. But the things that I said about being a problem solver, a world changer, a thought leader, a caring, wanting to make the world a better place, that always stays. The people come in and out. Careers come in and out. That stays.
And wouldn't it be boring if they don't, right? If you defined yourself and this is the job and that's it, for the rest of your career, how boring would that be? You want to grow, you want the outward parts to change and to change you, but this underlying level, this value system, it is going to be there. It's always going to be the base. I have this great story that I use to explain this to my students. And it's about watching my grandson, who was so excited whenever the garbage men would come to pick up the garbage every week. And because, he'd be right out there watching it, and he'd wave at the garbage collector, and they would talk, and they had a relationship. And I commented to my daughter, I said, this is amazing, that this man takes such time and care with this little guy out there every week. And she said, well, it's actually the company focus. They think that their job is way more about creating community than picking up the refuse. And so there's a focus on creating community. And I'm like, that is amazing, that whatever that job is, and you would never think that the people who are picking up the refuse would be thinking, we can do a lot more with this than just emptying the garbage cans. We can tighten the feeling of community in our city.
And we are all so much more than an identity of mother or an identity of daughter or an identity of sister or an identity of employee.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We're all so much more than that. So before we wrap up, what are a strategy to get to that base? You talked about that base of who you are, the work underneath the work. If there's a woman who's listening and she says, I have no idea who I am outside of being able to name off my relationships or maybe a lack thereof, what's a strategy or something you would give to her to be able to have an answer to that question?
I think that one of the biggest things that it takes is to start to listen to yourself, and that takes time. It takes reflection, and reflection is asking yourself questions about what you're experiencing. So I go out and I do a job. What is it in there that I really like? What is it in there that I don't? Or I go out and I have an experience. What is it that I like? What is it that makes me just come alive? And what is it that just drains the energy out of me? So that is increasing your self-awareness and taking the time to listen to yourself. I think that's really where it begins.
I love it. And as you were even talking about that, what has been consistent? Like, I'm always social, right? So starting a podcast, it was like, no little girl grows up and they weren't even podcasts, right? That wasn't like, oh, my dream is to be a podcast host, but I've always loved the art of conversation. I love the art of great and deep conversations. That being a podcast host hasn't been consistent, but loving meeting new people and starting new conversations has been a pattern in my life.
Right.
So trying to find the self-awareness of seeing some of those patterns.
Yes. Yeah. And reflecting, taking the time to go, you know what? I really like that. I really like having deep conversation with people. So you know that about yourself. And then you look for ways that can come out. Yeah. So I'm always going to need to be interacting with people. How am I going to make sure that I'm doing that in the different ways that I live in my life, the different avenues that I am interacting with people in my life?
Awesome, Karen. Well, thank you so much. Tell people where they can find more about you.
Absolutely. So I have a website, KarenRandallCoaching.com, and I would like to invite people to go to that little button in the upper right corner that says Ideas to Support You in Transition. And this is just a little 8-minute video that I did that talks about the process of transition, because I think that is so empowering for people to understand what they're going through and to start to look at it from a bigger view. Helps to decrease the suffering that can happen as we're going through these significant life changes. And then I do all sorts of webinars and classes, so just check out the website.
KarenRandall.com. Thank you so much for helping us on our journey to become toxic person proof.
Thank you so much, Sarah.